We just spent almost 4 hours with our colleagues there in a Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting. It was amazing to me how many ministers of defense on their own said, we're going to do this for as long as it takes. And so I continue to see unity. I continue to see resolve. And that's very, very encouraging. And I think it's encouraging for Oleksiy Reznikov and his team to hear that as well, because as you know, they're in the meeting as well. So, yeah.
So, Eileen, I'll make a couple of comments. First, on the Russians.
I still have a question for you, though.
Okay, but let me
That'll be like 4 questions, I think.
Let me help you out with this one first. So, start with the Russians. Ukraine's a pretty big country. This is not a small piece of turf. And the probability of Russia achieving its strategic objectives, of conquering Ukraine, of overrunning Ukraine, the probability of that happening is close to zero. I suppose theoretically it's possible, maybe, I guess, but I don't see it happening militarily. So I just don't see that happening. But they do currently occupy about 20% of that of Ukraine. So they occupy a piece of ground that's about 900 kilometers long, and I don't know, probably about 75 or 80 kilometers deep. So it's not a small piece of ground. And they invaded this country with upwards of 170, 180,000 troops in multiple field armies, combined arms armies. And they have suffered a tremendous amount of casualties, but he's also done this mobilization and called up additional people. So the Russians have reinforced, and they still have significant Russian combat power inside Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's had great success in the defense. They did a tremendous job in defeating the Russian offensive. It's incredible what they were able to do. And then they went on the offensive at the beginning of September. And they had great success up in Kharkiv, and they've had better success even down in Kherson, as you just witnessed. But Kherson and Kharkiv, physically, geographically, are relatively small compared to the whole. So that the military task of militarily kicking the Russians physically out of Ukraine is a very difficult task. And it's not going to happen in the next couple of weeks unless the Russian army completely collapses, which is unlikely. So in terms of probability, the probability of a Ukrainian military victory defined as kicking the Russians out of all of Ukraine, to include what they define or what they claim as Crimea, the probability of that happening anytime soon is not high, militarily. Politically, there may be a political solution where politically the Russians withdraw. That's possible. You want to negotiate from a position of strength. Russia right now is on its back. The Russian military is suffering tremendously. Leaders have been, the leadership is really hurting bad. They've lost a lot of casualties, killed and wounded. They've lost, I won't go over exact numbers because they're classified, but they've lost a tremendous amount of their tanks and their infantry fighting vehicles. They've lost a lot of their 4th and 5th generation fighters and helicopters and so on and so forth. The Russian military is really hurting bad. So you want to negotiate at a time when you're at your strength and your opponent is at weakness. And it's possible, maybe, that there'll be a political solution. All I'm saying is there's a possibility for it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, we've got time for just a couple more. Go to VOA, Carl Beth.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for doing this. Mr. Secretary, you've stressed that the United States and their allies are committed to Ukraine for as long as it takes. How long do you think Russia can continue this war with its current arsenal and its current personnel? And how much has Iran and North Korea's weapons extended their ability to wage this war? And Mr. Chairman, thank you. You thoroughly answered my question with Louis and Helene, so I'm going to ask you a question on China, if I may. After the meeting with President Biden and President Xi, have you seen any indications that China has changed its ambition to control Taiwan? And, the last time the National Defense Strategy was rolled out, the Pentagon said America's military edge was eroding. Now that this new one has rolled out, is America's military edge still eroding to China?
So, thanks, Carla. In terms of how long Russia can sustain their efforts, that's left to be seen. I think the chairman just gave a very accurate and compelling description of kind of where the Russians are right now. They have some problems. They've had problems since the very beginning of this, trying to sustain their efforts. Those problems have only become more acute. They've lost a lot of people, and as important, they've lost a lot of important military gear. So the numbers of tanks that they've lost, the numbers of armored personnel carriers, pretty staggering numbers. As important, the numbers of precision-guided munitions that they've rifled through in this endeavor is striking. But they won't be able to reproduce those munitions very quickly because there are trade restrictions on that prevent them from rapidly gaining microchips and other things that are required to produce these kinds of munitions. And so it may take years for them to restock that inventory up to the point that they were before they started this conflict. We've seen them struggle with having enough munitions to fight the way that they want to fight. So they're reaching out to Iran, they're reaching out to North Korea. I do think that those countries will probably provide them some capability. And so for that reason, I don't think this will be over anytime soon. Our goal, our requirement is to make sure that we continue to provide Ukraine with the means to do what's necessary to prosecute their campaign. And so they have to continue to keep the pressure on the Russians going forward. And I think, win or fight favors the Ukrainians. We've pushed, enormous amounts of winter gear into Ukraine, thanks to countries like Canada and others who have really been very, very generous. Russia, on the other hand, they're fighting in a foreign country. The Ukrainians have challenged their supply lines. It will be difficult for them to get the kinds of gear into their troops that they need to be able to fight effectively. And so I think the Ukrainians will have the upper hand in this fight as they have right now, but they'll continue to maintain that upper hand going into the winter, just like we saw them operate in February of last year. They know the land. They can pull things from the local communities, and they'll be prepared for this winter weather. And I don't think the Russians will be as prepared, and they'll continue to struggle to get things into their troops using the supply lines that they currently have. And the Ukrainians will continue to pressure those supply lines.
Do you think the Russians can hold out all it takes them the years that you say it would take for them to fully resupply?
I don't think the Ukrainians are going to allow them to hold out. I think the Ukrainians are going to continue to pressure them. And so this battlefield dynamic will change, continue to change. And Ukrainians know that, allowing them to rest and refit and rearm is a mistake. That's an operational mistake. And I don't believe they're going to make that mistake. And my goal is to make sure that they have the means to do what's necessary to ensure that they don't hold out.